Have you seen from the fellow travelers and media the latest TDS? That's Trump derangement syndrome. This was picked up by the Washington Examiner. Yesterday, a reporter for NBC said that Donald Trump was going to allow businesses, American businesses, to collude and work with businesses owned by the Russian, what's called, well, it's the FSB. It's the successor to the old Soviet KGB. And immediately, media all over the country picked this ball up. Now this is serious fake news. But for all those folks on the American left who screamed that it's coming from our side, what happened was got picked up by Keith Olbermann and got picked up by David Korn, the socialist writer at Mother Jones, which is a communist rag. And a number of other of these people in media just started running with the ball and breathlessly reporting it. And then later in the day, Peter Alexander of NBC tweeted, oops. New source familiar with sanctions says it's a technical fix planned under President Obama to avoid unintended consequences of cyber sanctions. Oh, so it was President Obama who actually got the ball rolling on this, and Mr. Trump is just continuing the policy. And it's a quick fix. It has nothing to do with the Russian Secret Service. I got it. But meanwhile, media breathlessly reported this all day long because, ooh, it's that bad old mean Mr. Trump again, and he's under the thumb of Vladimir Putin. Because it's what they want you to believe. They keep sharing these ridiculous narratives, and then they just amplify them. By the time they come out and say, oops, sorry, a lot of people never hear the oops, sorry. All you do is you hear the part they want you to hear, and that is, you were a stupid idiot for voting for Trump, and if we would only remove him from office by any means necessary, America would be so much better, and we could have open borders, and we could have people running down innocent people who are here without driver's licenses or insurance, and they'll vote for Democrats, and we can all have a free lunch. That's, again, what we're dealing with all of these people. The TDS continues. I'm just looking over some of the highlights from various publications this morning. Kelly Riddell writing at Washington Times. Google's corporate mantra is don't be evil. Did you know that? I didn't. Google also does business with the communist Chinese, who are, well, far worse people than anything we've ever produced. And yet, like any firm, she writes, Google needs to make money, and it's benefited from peddling soft influence in the nation's capital. Now that a new sheriff is in town, Google needs to at least pretend to play nice, or all will be lost. And Google is actually claiming that President Trump should be impeached post-haste. Its culture and profits, the writer says, were deeply rooted within the Obama White House and would continue under Mrs. Clinton if she had been elected. When Mr. Obama looked to open Cuba, Google was there offering to expand internet access. It also jumped in to save the blundering healthcare.gov website and capitalized on providing its fiber into low-income urban neighborhoods. When Google was the target of a Federal Trade Commission investigation for anti-competitive practices, Mr. Obama's White House closed the case without any charges. So in other words, they had papered up Mr. Obama's campaigns in the past and gotten a lot of friends on board. So they're allowed to do things that would be illegal for any other company to do. And they profited well under the Obama White House. And now, since they don't have Mrs. Clinton there to continue this, they profited in China too, as I said. You know that the socialist leader, Corbyn is his name, I believe, in England, he challenged Theresa May apparently on the floor of the House of Commons yesterday, demanding that she step in and cancel the official state visit of Mr. Trump. He's going to be visiting, and he'll be hosted by Queen Elizabeth. He's going to be coming there in May, I believe it is. Theresa May got him to come in May. All right, that's not very clever, I know. But the socialist government, or almost government, that they had, if he had won, they would have it, would block him from going. What type of relationship would that cause between the United States and the United Kingdom? Now, there's a question they should ponder. Piers Morgan, who's, again, no liberal or no conservative, Piers Morgan had a piece, and I believe it was the Daily Mail out of London yesterday, and what they did is they literally showed pictures of all of the despots Queen Elizabeth has hosted in the past. I mean, guys who were the reincarnation of Hitler, if you will. Nicolae Ceausescu, some of the great African dictators, not great meaning good, but some of the guys who were the biggest butchers on that continent. And she's done it throughout her reign. And Piers Morgan's commenting, he's saying, well, wait a minute here. Donald Trump doesn't rise to the level of any of these people. What is all of this caterwauling all about? Well, it's about the fact that Donald Trump is doing what he said he was going to do, and he's going to go forward with this. And it galls the liberals because it has stopped their efforts to remake the world in their own image. We've got 24. We're coming up on 8:40 this morning. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Uh, Before the short pause, just a quick note I wanted to mention our friends at Waddell & Reed right here in Twin Falls. Waddell & Reed has been in business since 1937. Do the math, that's 80 years. Waddell & Reed, one of the oldest firms to offer mutual funds. Waddell & Reed owns 2 mutual funds, owns and manages those. And Waddell & Reed invests with a conservative nature. These are people who know what they're doing, as evidenced by 8 decades of service. Waddell & Reed will take a more of a planning approach with you and try to look at each piece of your puzzle and help you build proper expectations. Waddell & Reed builds plans around the needs and goals of its clients. It will help manage money, and at Waddell & Reed, they take planning personally. We've got more coming up. Bill Colley with you on Top Story today on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. As I said, in the next hour, some thoughts on the politicization of football, which has become political football. Again, not very clever, I know. This morning I had a message. I got out of bed about 3 o'clock, and I had a message. I hadn't heard from this fellow in a couple of years. His name is Joe Panfile. Joe Panfile, big U.S. Marine. I mean, he's about 6'4". Looks like he's cut from a block of granite. And I hadn't, as I say, heard from him in the last couple of years. I met Joe, 6 or 7 years ago. He and one of his other fellow Marines, a young man by the name of Joe Tillelli. Joe Tillelli is the grandson of the former middleweight boxing champion, Joey Giardello. And they were working on a charity called Support Our Soldiers, and they were recruiting people in media to get involved with all of this. And I got to sit down and have an opportunity to talk to the two of them in a diner one morning. It was a funny thing because you start to really feel old. The waitresses were asking me if Joe Panfile was my son. That's it. A lot taller than I am, too. They all wanted to know because they all wanted to date with him. You know, he looks like he's John Wayne incarnate. You know, he's walking around 6'4" tall, just big, muscular, and all. But I can remember in the course, and these two guys, I'll tell you what. By the time they'd left the Marine Corps, they'd seen things that most of us will never see in our lives, and we should hope we never see. They lost friends in Afghanistan. An IED blew up a Humvee in their column, and some of their friends didn't make it out, and they had to stand by and listen to the screams of these men as they burned alive. These are the true salt of the earth of America, the true American heroes, and there are a lot of them walking around out there, and they never get any recognition. But in the course of my conversation, I was on the phone with Joe one day a few years back, and we got talking about some comments. My buddy Scott McConnell left the U.S. Army. He'd been in the Army in the 1990s, and then he went back in and finished up his 20 before retiring to Hawaii. But Scott had mentioned to me, he said that when I was first in the Army in the 1990s, he said it was just a bunch of guys like me from Tulsa, Oklahoma. We wanted to do the right thing, and we loved our country. And he said by the time I left, he said it was filled with gangbangers and the like, and he said it was becoming more the Obama Praetorian Guard. He said, I was glad to get out. He said the other thing was the officers had all become politicized. In other words, they wanted to do everything they could to please Mr. Obama, and if they didn't, they got the ouster like Stanley McChrystal. And I mentioned this to Joe Panfile, and Joe said to me at the time, he said, well, the Marine Corps has become a lot like that too. It shows you, though, that the military is pretty much filled with people still to this day. Not everybody is a gangbanger in the military. We want to make that as clear as we can. And overwhelmingly, I've seen a friend of mine, he's retiring. He's a lieutenant colonel in the Army. He's going to be retiring shortly, and he sends me occasionally these surveys from Army Times or Military Times, and it still shows that the troops are overwhelmingly, I mean, it's like 4-1 that they are conservative Republicans. A lot of them haven't been happy with the way management has been going the last few years. But that's going to change under Donald Trump. And I would think first of all, with James Mattis at the Department of Defense and with General Flynn involved in the White House and General Kelly at Homeland Security, that there's going to be an opportunity for a lot of those officers who thought they had to kowtow to the American left they're going to feel that they have some liberty back when it comes to decisions and the like, and the approach with what they do. And I think that's a wonderful thing. And it should tell us a great deal, though, that the military, these were people who supported. A lot of people on the left couldn't understand why the military supported George W. Bush, and it was because people say, well, he made some bad decisions, but the troops knew that he loved them, that he cared for them. I remember watching Barack Obama give a speech. It might have been at Fort Bragg, and even Don Lemon at CNN was shocked because when he shut up in front of the troops, there was barely any applause. And I learned later on that afterwards, they told the troops, hey, you got to welcome the commander-in-chief with a rousing welcome and cheer his remarks. So they had to be ordered to do that. And media still couldn't understand. This is the same media that said, well, you should vote for John Kerry. He's a war veteran. When all of the people I knew who were in the military at the same time as John Kerry, they despised him because he came home and said that they were all a bunch of barbarians at a Senate hearing. He threw his fellow troops under the bus. And media kept saying, oh, yeah, but he's a veteran. Well, what kind of veteran is he? That's the question. You see, that's what media can't seem to fathom. People in entertainment are the same way. Have you heard about the remarks from Sarah Silverman? She's a very left-leaning comedian. She was a Bernie Sanders supporter at one point. And she's very unhappy with Donald Trump. And she's been tweeting about it. This is from Fox News. And just as I was listening to it, I was thinking to myself, what would have happened if a Republican entertainer had made a similar overture while President Obama was still in office?
Actress and comedian Sarah Silverman took to social media to call for a military coup against the Trump administration, writing, "Wake up and join the resistance. Once the military is with us, fascists get overthrown. Mad King and his handlers go bye-bye." Silverman was an early Bernie Sanders supporter who, after Sanders lost the primary, switched her support to Hillary Clinton, telling Sanders supporters at the DNC,
"To the Bernie or bust people, you're being ridiculous."
This is a radical departure from her more peaceful attempts to reconcile the Clinton loss. These words come amid violent rioters burning buildings at the UC Berkeley campus in protest of Breitbart's senior editor Milo Yiannopoulos. Michelle Polino, Fox News.
So where does she get the impression that if there was ever going to be a military coup in this country, and I doubt it's going to happen anytime soon, if it did ever, but where does she get the idea that if it did happen, that it would be a socialist coup? Where do they get the idea that the men and women in uniform are all, just a drooling socialist like Sarah Silverman? What sort of narrow universe do they live in that gives them that impression? Because I talk to veterans and I talk to people in uniform all the time, and for the most part, they're not of that ilk. If there was ever to be a rebellion of the troops, people like Sarah Silverman better get out of the country, is what I'm telling you. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. It's 24. Got about 12 minutes before 9 o'clock. And if you'd like to reach us today, telephone number 736-0300. That's 736-0300. Speaking of the wacko left and how calm they are being about all of this. And again, having been in the Tea Party movement, I know how the media treated us. And we never did violent things. We never called for assassinations. And yet, they just give the left a pass on all of this. There's a story today. I printed this out. And it says, it's from Daily Signal. It says, in photos, the latest example of liberal tolerance. I'll talk about that in a moment. But these are bad people. And we need to let people know they're bad people. And media should start covering them if they're bad people. We have a caller with us. Caller, you're on the air on KLIX. Go ahead.
Good morning, Bill. It was reported about a month ago, a Mexican drug gang boiled a guy in a 50-gallon drum. President Trump, every now and then he talks about the Great Wall of China. But when I was young, there was a cartoon strip, Prince Valiant, and it showed that in medieval times, in order to be safe, castles with high walls was surrounded by a water-filled moat and had a drawbridge. Even back then, Bill, their leaders wanted walls and added a moat.
Hey, thank you. Prince Valiant, I was a huge reader myself, and I think it's still in print, but a lot of newspapers don't carry it any longer. If you go to Halifax, Nova Scotia, there's actually a statue of Prince Valiant there. Don't ask me why, but just it's there. We have another caller with us. Caller, you're up next, and you're on KLIX. Good morning.
There?
Go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, just reading on the computer that the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952 is quite a law that's passed. It's already is in effect to banning anybody that advocates the downthrow of the United States government. That's been in since 1952, and it would ban any Muslim coming to our nation. Law is already in effect, so I think everybody out there should call their congressmen and their senators and tell them to read that law. I did yesterday, and they couldn't believe it. And so I just thought I'd call and tell you that. They could pick that up on the news, on the computer, and read that. Anybody that can read can see it.
I've been talking about it for the last several days, and Judge Napolitano had a big piece in the Washington Times yesterday delving into that law. And mainstream media doesn't want people to know about it. They don't.
No, they don't, and neither does our state officials, and even boiling it down even closer to our local town and our local college. These colleges and these people don't want to hear that, and we pay their wages. And Bill, it's totally amazing to me that the people we hired to represent us become our enemies.
Yeah.
So I don't have any more to say. Thank you.
Thank you, and of course they get great generous benefits if you've got a government position, right? We have another caller. Caller, you're up next, and you're on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com.
Well, I just wanted to say that we need to look behind the scenes of all this so-called protests, and it really is funded by George Soros and his ilk, and seems like conveniently they just show up and turn a well, I wouldn't say peaceful, but something into something newsworthy and drawing attention to make people think that this is just so widespread. But
you know what really makes liberals mad is when you tell them that George Soros helped push his own people into Nazi ovens.
Yeah, he is the worst person I can think of on the face of this earth. And why are we not going after him? And the other thing I want to mention about the wall is why isn't there an effort to try to recruit the people coming over to help build it? I mean, it's like when you have people are building something or working, it's a lot harder for them to do bad things if they're doing something good. So they have a choice to go back to Mexico or stay and help build the wall, you know? So
give them some options, right? Yeah.
All right.
Thank you for the call. The old line, idle hands are the devil's workshop. If you keep them busy and do that, and maybe even they want to go back home, because once they actually get a little nest egg here, they could end up being a pretty, launch a business back home and become one of the more, when the caller mentioned the Mexican drug gangs boiling people alive, they borrow these ideas from ISIS, and we have evidence they're working in concert with Islamic terrorists. I'm not making that up. That was in the Christian Science Monitor 2 weeks ago, and the Monitor is a liberal publication. And the Monitor had to admit it's actually happening. I can recall watching the 60 Minutes update a few years ago where they mentioned these drug gangs. One of their favorite things to do is to try and intimidate people. They take their little kids. They took a 5-year-old boy and injected him with battery acid, and he died in horrible convulsions. They have no morals. They have no humanity. And this notion, the media was trying to tell you that Mr. Trump said he was going to invade Mexico, and he told President Nieto that if you don't clean it up, I'll come down there and do it. No, he was offering help. And these drug dealers, they don't necessarily have armies of their own. They would melt away quite quickly if they had to face the U.S. Marines. There's a history of that happening south of the border, we should point out. 8:53, you're up next. You're on the air with Bill Colley on KLIX.
Yeah, this is your Stone Age listener that's not online. So you just briefly mentioned George Soros. I've always wondered about him. Is he Jewish, and how old is he, and where is he living now?
I believe he's here in the United States, although he's wealthy enough. He has homes all over the world. He was, I believe, Hungarian by birth. When he was a teenager, he actually was recruited and worked with what do they call them, the capos and the various people in the concentration camps, and to help select his own people to march them off to the chambers and the gas chambers and then the ovens. He claims, it was survival. I had to do it. I had no other choice. And media buys into that because he's a fellow traveler.
Now, so he must be in his 90s or something?
Yeah, I think he's well into his 80s, late 80s now.
I see. Okay, well, wow. Listening to you is really informative, and I've always wondered who is George Soros and where did he come from? And yeah, I got a dumb question for you. Is he married?
That part of it, I don't know. I do believe he has children, though, so he must have been at some point.
Okay, all right. Okay, thanks a lot.
Want to thank him for the call. And, Soros, it could well be he wasn't married and had children, but his generation, at least still, even the liberals and the socialists, respected some of those old customs. 8:55, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Just a quick mention, the gun show is postponed. We're retooling some of the things with it, so just a straight hour of Top Story next hour, and we'll get back to talking guns next week. This came from Daily Signal, and it was in pictures what the liberal movement is currently about. And these are pictures of smashed windows and restaurants and various fires, and it shows people breaking windows. But what's also interesting, it's a series of pictures about some of the signs that they carry and how many of them are just coming directly out and saying, here's a couple of them that just simply say, kill Trump. Now, what would media's reaction have been if we had been at Tea Party rallies walking around with the signs that said kill Obama? And would the Secret Service have paid us a visit? I guess they would have. But that didn't happen at Tea Party rallies. Nothing of the sort ever happened. Here's some more pictures of banks looted that were, this, of course, in order to make your displeasure known against Republicans, you have to go out and loot banks, right? That's another way that you do this. And they're showing all of the fires that have been set at all these various locations. Fire can be dangerous. Just ask any local firefighter. They'll explain that to you, too, as well. You shouldn't play with it. Here's somebody that scrawled, kill Trump on a wall. Here's a Trump supporter whose face is all bloodied. He's got blood running down. His face is cut up around his eyes and his nose and his cheeks. That comes from your liberal left friends who claim that they're the people of love and compassionate. Well, if they're not going to church, then they're worshiping the other guy, so their view of love and compassion might be a little warped. But I wanted to share that with you at least today so you get a better handle on all of this. And the thing is, how many liberal leaders are out there saying, we got to calm this down? I'm glad you're passionate about it, but, we really shouldn't be out there beating people up and macing them and burning things down and looting banks and restaurants. This is giving us a bad reputation, and the Republicans are only going to end up winning more seats because they look really calm in comparison. But you don't see that. The liberal left leaders, they're not out there telling these people, hey, calm down. They're whipping them up into a frenzy, and they're continuing it. And again, like Sarah Silverman, somehow they think that the military is going to back them up if they get their revolution. Boy, have I got news for them. Bring it on. We have a short break for news. Speaking of news, coming up in a couple of minutes. From the Fox Radio Network, also one more hour of Bill Colley today on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Milo Yiannopoulos, who was the fellow that the angry demonstrators were trying to get to at Berkeley the other night, has some interesting thoughts on what they're actually up to. He was speaking with Tucker Carlson at Fox News Channel. I'll share some of that in the next hour.